Hello, good afternoon. You're welcome to a fresh class on how Christianity came into West Africa. Of course, in the last class, I was able to tell you how Islam entered into West Africa. Just like I've always said, Christianity came almost a little close to 600 years before Islam. But in the case of West Africa, Islam had its footprint strongly entrenched before Christianity. The Romans had tried to bring Christianity to Africa and was able to get to a place called Egypt. But that did not make much impact, as, for instance, was later culminated into the coming of Christianity into West Africa. West Africa had always been seen as somewhere a little hidden, and Europe, even though the Romans came to North Africa and the Maghreb, for some reason there was no direct connection between them and those from the West Africa. And when the Portuguese came in, they tried implanting Christianity. Remember, Henry, the Portuguese king's major interest was to make Africans, black Africans, Christian before everything changed and slavery overran the interest for Christianity. But for about 200, 300 years, Europeans' humanitarian conscience and issues that are associated with anti-slavery issues, that people began to question their conscience as regards what we call slavery, and the desire that slavery is indeed not that is a very heinous crime. And the effect of this made them push or put their interest into bringing or stimulating Christianity into West Africa. And this stimulation made the missionaries come into West Africa. But it came at a cost. A lot of missionaries who came into West Africa died. A lot of them died. And it had an effect, slowed the push to have Africans converted into Christianity. Even Africans themselves were somehow sluggish in accepting this very strange religion. A religion that preaches one man, one woman, a religion that have as its backbone a monotheistic God. And all this created in African minds a lot of differences, which they were not conditioned to want to believe. And these aspects created some form of sluggishness, some form of slow attitude of Africans to accept Christianity. Take this from me. The anti-slavery issues pushed Christianity higher, and also the humanitarian conscience made Christianity one of those things made it one of those things which stimulated the interest of Europeans to come into West Africa. Christianity, unlike Islam came through the trans-Sahara trade. And through the trans-Sahara trade, the Islamic religion was able to penetrate into West Africa. Of course, you have heard of Mansa Musa, his pilgrimage, so many pilgrimages, Sahanja, and so many groups did go on pilgrimage to show the footprint of how Islam was able to come into West Africa. But that was not to be so when it comes to Christianity. Christianity was something which I would say was somehow not, how would I call it? The inroads of Christianity was something which was kind of more difficult. I've just explained that a lot of the missionaries that earlier came died. True, of course, we all know about the effect of malaria, the weather, and all that. All these things culminated, and the Europeans found it very difficult to come in and penetrate into West Africa. One other thing which came up was that the fact that slavery, that anti-slavery, for about 300 years to 400 years, the slave trade was at its peak. Europeans were wealthy, just like I told you in the last lecture concerning issues that have to do with slavery. Europeans' economy grew because of slavery. That economy which grew because of slavery, what do I mean by that? Cheap labor pushed those economies higher than expected. I'm not saying European economies never grew before slavery, but I'm saying that slavery gave it a better chance, gave the European economy a better chance to be fast-tracked, to do better as empires of nations. And that helped Europe to grow faster. But in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century, during the industrial age, Europeans began to rethink their stance on slavery. Some seeing it from an humanitarian conscience, some seeing it for simply an economic issue, some also seeing it from the industrial age. What do I mean? At this period, the emergence of the machine did not attract much of labor, but people to steer the machine to do the work. And in this sense, the labor must how would I say it? The labor must be one that is well trained for such work. And as such, just getting people from West Africa and dumping them into a society and not well trained would not augur well for the industrial age. And this created in them the mindset to have to have alternatives. And that alternatives which they had was one which they called the legitimate trade, moving away from humans for goods to goods for goods. And the legitimate trade which they pushed for, the legitimate trade which Europeans pushed for, made slave trade uninteresting and them disinterested in such things as slave trade. And the focus was now how to go into the interior of Africa. And going into the interior of Africa, three major groups played a major role. The missionaries were major in this aspect. Also, not just the missionaries, the explorers were also major in this aspect, and also the traders. With the traders, the explorers, and also the explorers, the traders, and the missionaries, all this created an inroad, despite the fact that a lot of them who came in so many did die. A lot of them who came into um, West Africa, so many did die. And even at that, more push allowed Christianity to come into West Africa. More push allowed Christianity to come into West Africa. I would like to also make mention of the fact that those who wanted slavery to be kicked out were majorly people who belong to one society or the other that have evangelical and humanitarian ideas in that period. That had evangelical and humanitarian ideas. Men like William Wilberforce were one of those. Men like Granville Sharp were one of those who pushed that slavery must be removed as part of must be removed from what was happening in those periods. But with slavery removed, legitimate trade replaced it, which means the trading of goods for goods. And the trading for goods means more exploration into the interior of Africa. And the fact that the interior of Africa would be a source of what is called primary resources. Africa now became a primary source for the industries in Europe. What do I mean? Encouraging Africans to grow crops such as cocoa, to grow crops such as palm oil, to grow crops which are of different types or shapes, created an opportunity for the industries in Europe to be able to get these primary products to supply the economies of Europe. And they push for these primary products to supply the economy of Europe meant that Africa became a primary market. Even till today, for those of you who still want to understand this more, even till today, you will find out that the African economy is tied to the European economy. And by it being tied to the European or world economy, African economy do most of getting into the economies of other continents the primary materials. That's why you see today Africans don't really produce in terms of manufacture. Instead, much of it are what could be said to bring into the industries of Europe, America, and other places primary products to push the products in those industries. For instance, cocoa is taken to industries in Europe, and those industries in Europe ends up making chocolate products or products associated with cocoa and products associated with cocoa. Also, products are also taken to places, palm oil, for instance, is taken to some places in Europe and America to make soap and also many other things. Take note, this, although attached African economy to the European economies, but it became a primary resource group or resource provider to those economies. And Africa has not really left that form of have not really left that form of integration which we had in the 19th century. So you could see that the European economy got attached to the African economy through this means. And Christianity the pushing of Christianity into the society of West Africa is, for the Europeans, some form of Christian civilization, or you could call it some form of making the minds of Africa become subdued in a way that they would be ready for colonization. They would be ready for colonization. So the early intention is of twofold. Christianity coming to Africa is to create an ideology in the minds of the colonized, which could make them subdued to believe in the mindset of the colonizer. Another aspect could be simply as the Christians, the missionary groups, wanted Africans to understand and to be converted to their religion. Because, of course, like every other religious groups, they always see superiority of their religion over other people's religion. And that created in their minds that aspect to feel that Africans, for them to move forward, must, or for them to get civilized, must be made to become Christians. And this created in the mindset of the Africans some form of backlash to believe that if this is so, if this is so, they felt it as if it's been loved, pushed upon them, and which they were not comfortable with. Besides, the religion was considered as too out of place when we see it in context of Islam, for instance, or in context of polytheist religion. The fact that a lot of new ways of life were being introduced to Africans, which the Africans were not in any way comfortable with. The climatic conditions also was punishing to the Europeans, that Europeans were not also very comfortable bringing the religion into Africa. They were not very comfortable bringing the religion into Africa. So these were all the contexts that we must look at as regards the issue of Christianity coming into Africa. In West Africa, the efforts to go beyond the coast to reach those inland with the gospel coincided with the southwards expansion of Islam. Remember when I was teaching Islam coming into West Africa, Islam came from the north. Islam came from the Sahara. Islam came through the Sahara trade. Islam had come earlier enough. You remember the Almoravids ravaging old Ghana Empire. And although they never colonized old Ghana Empire, but they introduced a large number of converts into that society. And from then on, Islam increased. But Islam was now pushing southwards. And this made Christianity, which was coming from the Atlantic Ocean, to have a clash with it. Islam was now pushing southwards. And this made Christianity, which was coming from the Atlantic Ocean, from the south, to have a clash with it. Which means the battle now would be for the battle of the souls and mind of men. the battle for the souls and mind of men. The southward expansion of Islam posed some threats to the expansion of the work of Christian evangelizing missions. The southward expansion of Islam became also another threat to Christianity, which was expanding from the south, became another threat to Christianity, which was expanding from the south. The work of the missionaries also had a little success initially. I've explained that to you. The work of the missionary had a little success initially. That was because of the climate. A lot of the missionaries did die while trying to do evangelism. The climate was punishing to them, and as such, they were not encouraged. They were, one way or the other, debarred from getting into West Africa. And this slowed, of course, the Christian work in West Africa. And the people who are listening to the religion were somehow indifferent to it. They felt, what type of religion is this? Religion that seems to promote things that were not part of the social system which they wanted. Religion that seems to be considered not part of the social system which they wanted. And this created in them some disinterest, and they felt that this religion is something which they have no interest in. This religion is something which they have no interest in at all. And this created in them a lot of disenchantment, a lot of ill feeling, a lot of indifference to the religion of Christianity. It was, however, the coastal territories filled with mulattoes and other European trading communities that Christianity won some of its early converts. The mulattoes. Europeans in the south had started having children from Africans. And those children, of course, who may have fathers who are whites, who are Europeans. They are the ones we call mulattoes. And mothers who are Africans, or mothers who are Europeans, which are quite rare those days, and fathers which are Africans. Whichever way, they are considered or called mulattoes. And of course, the mulattoes were the early converts in those places we call the trading communities, which means the sea areas, the coast areas, the littoral areas were where Christianity really got its early sources. As these people became converted, then the interior was still resistant to it. But these people from the coast were the first group of people that became converted into Christianity. And their conversion helped in pushing the religion faster. Remember, the mulattoes, for instance, grew up in the African environment, and the climate and the weather would not have become something that they themselves would not be comfortable with. The weather would not have been something they themselves would not be comfortable with. And remember that the traders were also major at those areas. Remember that the traders were also major at those areas. And because they were major at those areas, and most of the traders from Europe were also Christians themselves. So in their own way, they were able to push Christianity there. Then the church or the missionaries were now playing a major and strong role in the conversion of souls of the people of the coast. And so the people of the coast increased, the population of the people of the coast increased and changed the mindset of some into believing in issues that are we consider as the first converts of Christianity. Take note, the first Europeans arrived at the West African coast at the end of the 15th century. But for several years, they paid attention to slave trade. At the beginning, they paid attention to slave trade rather than evangelization and Christianization of the people. They paid more attention to slave trade rather than evangelization and even Christianization of the people of West Africa. Those from who came at first where I told you at the beginning when the Portuguese came, they even tried in the Benin Empire to try to convert some Benin, would I call them citizens now? Citizen people, Benin people in those empires. But that did not work out. But the imprints are still there. If you go to Benin today, you will see the aspects or what the people were able to, the Europeans were able to, the Portuguese, let me say the Portuguese were able to do in Benin. It still remains there. There's a church dedicated, known to have been the establishment of the Portuguese in Benin Empire. But that did not do that much. What imparted more to Christianity coming into West Africa was the advent of the mulattoes. And of course, if you look at it from that scenario, it takes 9 months for a child to come up, and mulattoes are children of the one you call half caste, are children of Europeans and Africans. And these children of Europeans and Africans played a strong role in pushing Christianity. Then another group that played so much later on was the slaves who came back from Brazil, who came back from America, who came back from Britain, who came to places like Sierra Leone, who were brought back to places like Sierra Leone and Liberia. They played a major role in making sure that Christianity have a firm grip in West Africa. They played a major role in making sure that Christianity have a firm grip in West Africa. However, by the turn of the 19th century, look at the period. This should be around 400 years before Christianity began to have a strong grip. Christianity, the Portuguese came with the mindset of bringing Christianity into West Africa, but they did not do much. The mindset went into slave trading, and after that, those who came early to convert people into Christianity, also a lot of them died. And because they died, this affected or slowed down or made the incursion of Christianity sluggish and did not allow the Christian faith to have an imprint in West Africa. Did not have the Christian faith to have an imprint in West Africa. So the missionaries now had to develop what is called a systematic effort of bringing sects such as Anglicanism, Methodists, Baptists, who were active in places like Sierra Leone,
to come to places like Ghana, to come to places like Gambia, to come to places like Dahomey, to push the Christian faith on the Africans. In the 19th century, Afro-Brazilians returned to places like Benin or Benin, to places like Benin and places like Nigeria with the Catholic faith. And all this helped Christianity to grow in West Africa. All this helped Christianity to grow in West Africa. Places like Nova Scotia had a large settlement of African slaves, former African slaves, who came there. Nova Scotia, you find Nova Scotia in a place called Sierra Leone. Places like Nova Scotia had a large number of African slaves who became Christians, who came to push or convert Africans who were originated from West Africa to Christianity. And in year 1787, in the year 1787, the missionaries advanced and pushed the Christian faith. People like Van der Kemp in 1799 also tried its best to push Christianity. The CMS, the Holy Ghost Fathers, and so many groups tried their best also to push the Christian faith. The CMS, for instance, began to work on freed slave villages in Sierra Leone in 1804. The Methodists pushed their Christian faith in 1811. They pushed their Christian faith in 1811. The CMS did theirs in 1804. So you could see the impact in which these groups were trying to do. Take note, at the beginning, the interest of Europeans was to civilize the African, although I take quote and unquote exception to that. That word civilized. The Europeans did not come to civilize us. They came to push their own ideas upon us. They came to push their own ideas upon us. But let's take their concept here. They came to civilize us. But their minds was changed, was pushed to other directions. And the slave trade became more enticing for them. And because the slave trade became more enticing for them, they began to also do the slave business. And what they did with the slaves is they took them 200, 300 years before the humanitarian conscience and their views on anti-slavery issues became more prominent, and they felt that things associated with slavery should be removed. And as such, slavery was technically not in one day, gradually abolished. Slavery was gradually abolished. But those who pushed the anti-slavery issues had a Christian mindset, and a lot of them began to think of civilizing the West African region with their beliefs. But at this period, just as I have explained to you, Islam had a strong foothold. So before Christianity even came to Africa, to West Africa, I mean, Islam had got to West Africa and had a strong foothold. And everyone who understands Islam very well knows that Islam is a way of life. It takes you in every aspect. The clothes you wear, It's just Islam becomes like your culture, the kind of clothing you wear, the kind of things you are expected to listen to, the way you take your bath, every just aspect, what you eat, you could see Islam takes you from. But when Christianity came, Christianity was more seen to be quite different. A religion that promotes things, ideas, or views that Africans were not used to. So the early Africans became disinterested in it and unhappy with whatever they could be, what Christianity was bringing to them. Because they unhappy with whatever Christianity is bringing to them, they were disinterested in whatever it is saying. And as such, Christianity did not make more incursions, early incursions, as Europeans would have expected. Coupled with the fact that a lot of Europeans who came died because of the climatic conditions, the topography of the place. This created in their some form of fear, some form of punishing on them, which they slowed Christianity in a place such as West Africa. So the success began to increase with the mulattoes who became Christians, who grew up in the African system, who was able to push the religion also. Then the slaves who came to places like Sierra Leone and Liberia, who themselves were able to push the Christian faith. So you could see that all these groups helped to shore up the belief in Christianity. They helped to shore up the belief, the Christian ideas of doing things. I'm not so saying that the Christian way of doing things is not a culture of its own, it's not a way of life. Of course, Christian ideas, Christian ideology, Christian doctrine is also a way of life. When it comes to who do you marry? I mean, how many wives you marry, for instance? What kind of dressing you are expected to wear, and so many other things which religion have an impact upon. So any successes included, we are included in places like where the successes increase the more, we are the coastal areas. Just like Islam having success close to the desert, Christianity had more of its success, early success, close to the coastal areas. The people of the coast were majorly the ones. They started trading, they started slavery, they saw the Europeans first. The Europeans came through the littoral end, through water, through the sea. And when they came, the Africans they met there were Africans who lived close to the coast. So they had a close encounter more with Europeans until the Europeans began to come into the interior to try and push Christianity, try and push their market, which is the traders, try and explore and know what is in the interior of Africa. And of course, just like I've always said it, Africa is one of the best continents in the world. A continent that its weather is good, the society, the climate is something that encourages agriculture and helps animal husbandry. So the coastal areas were indeed important in the pushing of Christianity into West Africa. The others include the French trading posts, where the places like Grand Bassam, Asime, Libreville. Libreville, the capital of Gabon today, were places that Christian influence increased greatly. And from the south, the Europeans began to come into the north and push into the interior, and that became more interesting for their beliefs. That became more interesting for their beliefs. At the end of the 18th century, for instance, the evangelical revivals began to bring to Africa an influx of a lot of missionaries whose labors will produce the first fruit of an enduring Christian presence in sub-Saharan Africa. So you could see that the evangelical revival movements encouraging more missionaries, pushing more missionaries to the work, began to produce fruits for that enduring Christian presence in West Africa. Remember, as these missionaries were coming, they were setting up schools. They were trying to teach Africans how to read and write, setting up health centers, and all these were a way of luring, trying to bring the African people to see their own views and understand them better. And in that manner, success began to increase when it comes to Christianity coming to West Africa. Towards the end of the 19th century, Christianity was already having its impact. Catholic priests were coming more into the interior of Africa. Catholic priests were coming more into the interior of Africa. They began to emphasize the Christian way of doing things. They began to emphasize the Christian way of doing things. The Catholics had more inroads because the Catholics were more focused into the interior. And in that manner, they were able to get a lot of converts too. The Methodists, the Anglicans, and all these groups were majorly those who became more interested in pushing the Christian religion, who became more interested in pushing the Christian religion into West Africa. So West Africa, Christianity coming into West Africa was something which is quite interesting, something which is, I would consider, quite important for you who are students. For you who are students, you will see how important these certain actors played in bringing into West Africa the Christian religion. Today we have an influx of large population of Christians in West Africa, but that large population must remember that those who came first in making sure that Africans were evangelized to. The Bible societies, all sorts of groups worked towards the evangelization or winning of African souls. Everything was thrown at it. The reading culture, which means Africans, we are taught, but take note of this, is the teaching of Africans to go to school to read was majorly to make them laymen, mere interpreters of evangelistic ideas. But this helped the Africans to improve on things associated with education, and from then on, they began to make inroads when it comes to education. One thing I must also let you know, these Africans who we are introduced to reading by missionaries and all sorts, where it was something intentional to make them laymen. But as they became laymen, they improved on themselves to be able to have better understanding of things associated with it. That's why, for instance, the focus was not to teach the sciences, for instance, but the focus was to teach the humanitarian courses, the arts. Of course, if the sciences were taught to the Africans, this would make them, of course, start things which could begin to challenge the European society. So all those things were not done. Then Islam also did its best to challenge the inroad in which the Christians were made to pursue. So we can see from all these perspectives that indeed Christianity had gone through an enduring way to have its way in West Africa. And today, the West African region is dominated by people who have Islamic orientation and also Christian orientation. And of course, we can't remove the polytheists, people who worship gods, and the orientation had become one that it looks as if it was forever there. But that did not, it looks as if it was forever there. But it took a lot of times, a long period, for it to get to where it is today. I would like you, if you have questions, I want you to send message through the comment section. Let me see your questions. Let me read your questions. Let me read your questions, if I could answer them. Let me read your questions, if I could answer them. Waiting for your questions. I'm waiting for your questions. Let me read your questions, if I could answer them. Waiting for your questions. Waiting for your questions. Well, I would also want to let you know that in preparation of your the end of okay, somebody is asking a question here, and although Christianity came first to Africa, came to places like Egypt, Algeria, and all those places in the map. But when Islam came, the Almoravids, through other groups, they were able to move and make an incursion into West Africa. So Islam had even the kings of so many of those empires, Askia the Great, Mansa Musa, Mansa Suleiman, all these were even Muslims. And Muslim missionaries were coming very early into West Africa. Missionaries such as Ibn Khaldun, all these missionaries came and they were able to bring Islam into West Africa. Even the kings were so much impressed about Islam that they administered, brought Islamic clerics, Islamic civil servants to be one of those who would help in the administration of the empires. So by the time Christianity was coming in the 15th century, making its incursion in the 15th century, Islam was more or less very strong and had a strong foothold in West Africa. And the West Africans, some of them who are Muslims, were already reading and writing Arabic even before the coming of Christianity. And when the Christians came, the focus was changed from which from they had the intention to make converts of West Africans. But this was the period the slave trade emerged. And for about 300 to 400 years, the slave trade was something that they diverted their attention. The slave trade diverted their attention, but by the time they came back trying to bring this Christianity, it was a little late, 17th, 18th, 19th century. But today they've been able to do well. The success of Christianity is no doubt very high among West Africans, and also the success of the Islam is no doubt very high. But let's take note, these two religions are considered Abrahamic religions. They have this phobia, which they believed was a major source where the two religions came from. A man called Abraham, or Ibrahim as the Muslims will call them. And this created these two religions. The third one did not make much inroads in West Africa. The third one is Judaism. That didn't really make much inroads. Although the other two religions, Islam and Christianity, especially Christianity, could some aspects. No more question. I want to thank you for listening to me, and I would like you all to prepare yourselves for another lecture if possible. Okay, class.